Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two, from eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things building sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation, can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport, all those planes landing and taking off, and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead, and remember and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their mind. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Neuroscience of the Teenage Brain. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. My name is Ebone Kimber, and I am the Program Director at Children's Aid Society's Independent Living Program. My hope is that by the end of this webinar, you will be able to do 5 things. First, gain understanding of what past incidences are affecting our youth and young adults in foster care. Explore and identify what neuroscience is and how it integrates into the work we do with older youth in foster care. Revisit and highlight the effects of trauma on teen and young adult brains, and note how important it is for you to grasp these concepts and utilize them in practice. 4, acknowledge treatments available and how you can effectively engage teens with the information gained in this presentation. And 5, leave with key resources and information you can research and study that will help you implement the tools that we discussed. Okay, so let's get started. So I broke it down into a couple of different things. And so the first thing we'll talk about is the event or events. And these are incidences that happen to our youth and young adults, okay? Things that we aren't surprised about, that we already know about, but it's good to have a reminder of the experiences that they have been exposed to. So the first is abuse. When we talk about abuse, it's the typical physical, emotional, mental, and or sexual. It could be all of those things or one, or a combination. There are also different types of abuse that specifically occur in the lives of our teenagers, especially once they get into that age. And there's things that affect them that feel abusive to them that may not necessarily feel abusive to other people. So something like being forced to take care of their siblings. So guardians or parents may say, you know, I'm about to go, you have to do this, and that can feel abusive to them. Or they may be forced to engage in adult-like activities, and while they it may seem fun to them now, in their past that may have been something that they were pushed into at a young age, and so that is something that may have felt abusive. And then other things, they may have been forced to steal, to do substances, to do sexual acts, and so all of those things are types of abuse that our young people would have been introduced to. Then when we talk about abandonment, we're talking about young people being left to what I call left to their own devices. So, you know, like I mentioned before, parents or guardians leaving them in situations. A lot of times I hear people say, well, they make choices to do these bad things or bad decisions. They may be bad decisions, but sometimes they may have been put in that position by someone who abandoned them. And sometimes that leads to them getting involved in juvenile delinquency. When we talk about neglect, a lot of times with teenagers, we're discussing emotional neglect. Because most of the times they're going to speak up if there's any other types of neglect, but that doesn't mean that they didn't experience that in their past. And sometimes for them, someone not being present or loving towards them can feel neglectful. So a lot of times neglect happens to them after they have come into the foster care system. So if they have a foster parent who gives up on them, if they're moving multiple placements, they may feel this leaving group homes as well. And so that is a feeling of neglect to them. There also is what I call accidental neglect. Parents who have really good intentions and are working extra hard to try to provide for their family, and they don't have anybody else to be there for their kids, but they're working long or overnight hours. And that again leaves our young people to their own devices and ends them up in really difficult situations that they make poor choices. And so all of that is like a trifecta of situations that are occurring. Then what I call poor choice parenting. And that to me, that is engaging kids and teens in dangerous or harmful situations. So not feeding kids, leaving them with non-trusted individuals, substance use again, beatings without regard. We have a lot of kids who got into fights with their parents. And while a lot of times we'll say, well, they did this, this, and this, but when you're a parent, you make different choices. And sometimes the biological parents of our kids aren't making those good choices. And so they end up in those situations. And then they get exposed to violence, domestic violence, poor choices in environment. So a parent, because of their substance use or mental health, may choose to live in a car even though they don't have to because they've spent all the money. And sometimes too, not following up on education can be a poor choice parenting situation. And then environmental stress, so violence, being exposed to violence and gang activity, drive-by shootings, even living in a poorly upkept neighborhood can be traumatizing for a young person. And so poor school systems come with that. And then an environmental culture that is promoting delinquency and drug use can also be an incident that happens to our young people. So those are the types of situations that they are getting introduced to. And so when we talk about these things, the reminder that we should give ourselves is that it is not their fault. Typically what I hear from people when you talk about a child who is from a baby to probably around 9 when the cuteness goes away, you know, people are saying, oh, this poor child, they didn't ask to come into this world, and their parents did them so wrong, and poor things, they just need love and understanding. And then it's like something shifts and changes when they become a teenager and a young adult. And then all I hear is they just don't want to do better. or they just don't care, or they don't want our help. And there's a list of other things that I have heard people say that it just completely shifts. But at the end of the day, they are that same young child when they are a young adult. They've had the same experiences. They may have been given the opportunity to experience resilience and some of the other things we'll talk about where their brain has changed a little bit. But that doesn't mean that that negates that they have experienced some of those same things. And I just want us to really remember that. So I'm sure many of you may not have been exposed to neuroscience, and so it may be hard to connect the two of what it is we do in neuroscience because it may be far-fetched. So I want to make sure to discuss that. So neuroscience by definition is any or all of the sciences such as neurochemistry and experimental psychology, which deal with the structure or function of the nervous system and the brain. Okay. Another definition describes it as the study of how the nervous system develops, its structure, and what it does. And then neuroscientists particularly focus on the brain and its impact on behavior. We like that word in our world, and cognitive function. Okay. So basically, our world and the science world get married, is basically what it is. Okay. And so it can do a couple of different things. It can help you gain a better perspective on the behavior that you are seeing in your teens that you work with, or if you're a foster parent in your home. It can also help you to consider different options and how you are interacting with them, and will guide you in your responses. Okay. So this is going to give you a different perspective on what it is that you can do. Okay. And so what we're going to talk beyond this about is how does this affect my teams and the work that I do with my team. Okay. So that is the event. All right. So now we're going to move on to the effects. And before we move on, I want to show you this picture, and I want you to keep it in your mind as we do this talk, so that you can continue to have this. And we're going to talk about all these things. We're going to talk about the influence of their peers, their impulsive actions, their feelings and how they deal with their emotions, their growth, their brain development, the plasticity of their brain. All of these things encompass the work that we do with our young people, and are key to us making a mindset shift in order to better serve them. Okay. So I just wanted to show you guys that. All right. So going to science class for a second, I know that it seems like a lot, but it's extra important, and it's just a continuous reminder. We talk about a lot of this in trauma-informed care. I'm going to give you guys a lot of resources of what I have researched on so that you can look into that and know, okay, what I'm talking about. So two major functions of the brain that explain the reactions of most of us, but specifically are based on where these areas are in development of the teen and adolescent years. So the first one, I'll first jump to the limbic system. That's the emotional center of the brain. That's where they develop meaning, and that's where they develop their social skills. And so that's where the peer involvement is controlled. All of that is based off of some of signals that I'll talk about, the neurotransmitters. That's where those synapses are developed of their learning, and their early learning is developed. Okay. And then the most important part is the prefrontal cortex. I'll show you a picture later on that talks about that this is fully developed in adults, but this is the last place to be developed for teenagers. And the prefrontal cortex holds the thinking, memory, reasoning, and rational development. All of those things are housed in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, these are areas of the brain that are critical development stages in the teenage years, and they continue to mold and move all the way up until they're 25 years old. So it's still developing throughout that time. Now, this doesn't mean that the brain can't change after 25, because we'll talk about neuroplasticity later, but it does mean that some of the major functions are being developed and molded and moved. And also something to consider is the effects of trauma that we talked about, the abuse, the neglect, the abandonment, and how they have significant impact on their development in this time period of their life. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Then you have the amygdala, is a cluster of brain cells that determines whether a sound image or body sensation is a threat. One of the books that I will reference is The Body Keeps Score. and it discusses the threat response team. Okay, and that is based on the neurotransmitter serotonin. Okay, and so that is where that is released. And so another part to think about is the neurotransmitters, which serotonin is. And neurotransmitters, well, first I'll talk about serotonin. Serotonin specifically is it helps to relay messages from one area of the brain to another. Okay, because of the widespread distribution of the cells, it's believed to influence a variety of psychological and other body functions. When a young person has low serotonin levels, that equals a harder ability to cope with stress. And a lot of times what happens is a exposure to trauma or poor life experiences can actually bring down your serotonin levels. The other neurotransmitters or the happy hormones that they will have are dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, estrogen, and progesterone. Okay, so all of those are affected by the experiences that they have actually been through. So that is the first part. So that's the brain part of all of it, the four main parts of the brain. So then we'll talk about the trauma and how the trauma affects those different processes. Okay. So first, so all of this is molded together. So you'll kind of hear me going back and forth. That's why it's a circle, is because they can jump in and out of this circle at any time. Okay. So that is just how the cycle of trauma is. So the first one I'll talk about is attachment. Ineffective attachment early on in life looks very different for each young person. But some examples of that include little to no attachment to their mother in utero. So there is research of even when a child is conceived and growing in their mama's belly, things that happen while they are in utero can affect them later in life. Okay, that's where fetal alcohol syndrome comes in, and that has shown some behavior issues later on due to that. Also, substance use during pregnancy and throughout childhood, and much of the abuse we mentioned earlier can all have effects. And how this is connected to the brain is that insecure attachments signal the brain that humans cannot be trusted. And these signals are sent frequently, and stress responses are developed according to certain situations. And that brings us back to the conversation of stress responses and the threat response routine, threat response team. And let me mention too, this all ties into relationships. It's like all together. Okay, so it's hard to separate it, and it's so much information because it all is so important. So this is like a condensed. I could probably talk about this all day. All right, so stress reactions. Okay, so in the Body Keeps score, they discuss the stress hormone cortisol, which ends stress response and gives the all clear. Okay, so cortisol helps them to be like, okay, I don't have to be stressed anymore. Individuals who have experienced trauma, they keep secreting stress hormones, and that leads to them finding other ways of relief, and that includes smoking, sex, high risk activities. Okay, so then, I'm sorry. So then that also brings on the discussion of fight, flight, or freeze, which continues after the danger is over. So they are in that, Freud described it as the compulsion to repeat, right? And so basically what it is constantly telling them, this is a threat, this is a threat, this is a threat, because those are the signals that they received early on in life. Our job is to help them to find ways to bring their happy chemicals back and to be able to bring them back down from those unhealthy stress responses, and for them to really feel like they don't have to activate the threat response team 24/7. Okay. And one thing to note that they mentioned in Body Keep Score is that oftentimes what that is the brain's unconscious attempt to get control of a painful situation. So it's trying to protect them, but really what it's doing is it's causing them to be fixated. And what they mention is that therapy could reinforce that fixation, which is an interesting concept to me because I can see that, because even for me as a therapist, I would notice that kids would try to avoid talking about those hard times. and they would literally verbalize that to me. And they literally would leave a therapy session and go out and have a fight or go out and create chaos. And now I am more educated in understanding that maybe that was triggering that threat response team, and maybe that wasn't the best way. And so we have to be aware of that sometimes, of how that is affecting them. Okay. All right. So there's another book that I will reference that's called The Restorative Approach. It's specifically for group homes and facilities, because it was written by someone who actually owns one. And basically, what they are saying is that re-exposure to stress might actually provide a relief for anxiety for kids, because they get those chemicals released that the threat response team releases and makes them feel, what they think is a safe experience. Okay. And so what the trauma does for them is it helps them to avoid vulnerability. So, it's that I'm tough, I'm hard, I don't trust nobody, I don't need you, or it's contempt. It also helps to navigate fear and shame. And then, of course, like the stress responses that we talked about. Okay. And so in the restorative approach, they deal in the manner in which you handle the reaction or response to youth who have been traumatized. And to them, they describe the most powerful tool in your interaction with young people is relationships with them. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Basically, how I see it is having healthy and safe relationships help us to know how to build trust. And our youth haven't had that. Okay. And so that is just something that we have to be aware of. And having healthy and safe relationships do help us to know how to do that. All right. And something else to consider is their symptoms have been life-saving in the past. Okay. They've been firing those neurotransmitters, letting them know something is stressful. You have to be on, you got to be ready. And so one book that is good that I am going to reference to is Fear to Love by Brian Post. And that's specifically for foster and adopted parents. He's actually a former adoptee. He was adopted. He was in foster care and adopted. And he talks about that. And he also worked in a lot of residential facilities as well. And he talked about going from fear to love and helping a young person cope with that and go through that. And so I think that is an important concept of fear and shame and what those neurotransmitters are doing and how they're causing them to react to life. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that puts into perspective that all of those things are connected. And so we're going to move to talk about the hangover, which I know everybody's like, what is the hangover? So curious. Okay, so first I want to show you this picture inside the teenage brain. So you can kind of get a better perspective. I didn't talk about the other things, but all of those things are important too, because everything in the brain is connected. So all of those things are affected. But you can see the prefrontal cortex and that it's the biggest portion of the brain. And, on this picture, it functions to include planning and reasoning. And we really have high expectations of our kids to have plans and to get their life together. It takes me back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of what level they are on as far as meeting their own personal needs. And planning and reasoning is pretty high up there at the tip of that triangle. And not always because of personal choice. Sometimes that's just where their brain development is. And so this says, that makes them prone to high risk behavior. And we'll talk a little bit about that some more. And then you see the amygdala, it's where their impulse comes. And that's why that one is more active for a teenager. And because they are reacting off of their emotions. And so their brain is just a little bit more disorganized, okay? So the hangover, and this really just covers how they are coping with the trials of their life. Let me give you the definition of hangover so you can put it into perspective, okay? So the definition of a hangover refers to the symptoms that result from drinking alcohol, okay? So in our case, we'll talk about the symptoms that result from experiencing trauma. And so basically the definition says there is no absolute cure, but people can take steps to relieve many of the symptoms. And that we can apply that to trauma-informed care as well, okay, and issues of the brain, okay, or matters of the brain, even though they are experiencing the after effects of trauma and how their brain is reacting to that, there are ways that we can respond differently with that knowledge and give them that knowledge to help them to better develop resilience and really restructure their brain to respond a little differently. So just to highlight some of the things that you all are seeing, a lot of times I talk to social workers and their frustrations are with some of these things. The behaviors are typically what they're going to call them. Group homes will typically call them behaviors. I'm more prone to call them reactions. I just recently did a training and they called it predispositions. And basically how they described it is the brain develops dispositions on how it reacts to certain situations. Okay, and that brings in the threat response team and how they're responding. So you'll see, I'll make this bigger so you can see a little bit better. So they're going to do 5 different things: ignore, take risks, avoid, have aggression, and try to get attention. All right. Those are all typical kid situations, and they're going to be at different and varying levels. Okay. So a lot of the situations that I hear about is they're pretending like nothing's happening. They're just ignoring it. They're acting like nothing's going on around them, or I told them to do something and they didn't do it. The risks, of course, there's a long list of risks. All right. Drinking, drugs, making bad choices about their partner, bad choices of friends, stealing, sexual encounters. The list could go on as far as risks are concerned, right? Avoiding situations, running away. I know right now, especially during the pandemic, it's like school is just extra overwhelming for our kids. Is just like signaling all of these failure responses of like, you're gonna fail, just don't do it, stop doing it. And so their brains, I just can't imagine like what their brain looks like right now. And aggression is, fighting, constant arguments with adult figures. And the interesting one for me is the attention part of it, is the starting arguments with people they care about. That's something that I feel like is an attention thing for them. And so I think sometimes what they do is they are just trying to do whatever they can to get somebody to focus on them. And so I don't know. I just feel like that it puts into perspective, excuse me. And one thing to remember is that a lot of people tell me like, you're just making excuses for their behavior. No, it's just where they are right now, and it's what they're experiencing. And I'm not giving them excuses. We're just trying to find explanations for why they are experiencing that and how we can react to that to help counteract their reactions, and help them to be more successful. Okay. Sorry. All right. Okay, so just to list some ineffective ways of responding, okay, um, is making attempts to control our young people. Um, okay, and let me say this, and because I just read it, I'm not saying that how you're responding is wrong. I'm just saying that it's ineffective. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. Okay, so our attempts to control them. So situations like, I'm going to take your keys from you, because you keep going places without telling me. And this is a 20-year-old living in their own apartment. Okay, maybe we need to react a little bit differently because, I mean, if they've been living on their own, taking the keys to their car is, first of all, not realistic because they have to go to work, they have to do certain things, and so that's not going to be necessarily helpful. Okay. Um, for this is more specific for like group homes, and this came straight out of the restorative approach, is putting them in isolation, or putting them in a restraint, away from everyone after they got in a fight. Oftentimes, when a child is feeling aggressive or going through stuff, there's something triggering in them and going on, and isolating them actually further gives them their threat response. And so basically what the restorative approach says is there needs to be a way to be able to engage them a little bit better to help their brain know that, anytime I get in trouble, I'm not going to be left alone. you know, to my own devices. And that's really, if you go back to what we talked about as far as the neglect is concerned, is their parents abandoned and left them in certain situations. And technically, we are re traumatizing them by putting them in isolation and leaving them and not putting them around people. So it's just ineffective. All right. And then also, mindsets that they're just trying to get attention, or they're just lazy, or they just don't want to do it. It just minimizes the fact of what is really going on, and it helps us to just ignore that and think that they just don't want to do it, so we're not going to help them. And I just think that that's unfair to the young person, in us not considering what they have been experiencing or going through in the past. And it takes away the opportunity for us to help them develop and find new ways of firing their brain and their neurotransmitters to find different pathways. So that's just Ebony's thought process as far as that is concerned. Is how, and now we're going to talk about how we can help them to combat those hangover effects by trying to help them through, you know, their treatment process. Okay, so I hate it. The only thing I don't like about this part is that I can't get questions, because I know there's probably like a ton of questions. So if you all do have questions, please email us and send us those, because I would love to answer them. It's just right now the recording is I don't know, I guess it's easier for us right now. And maybe we'll do some live webinars to be able to allow that. But if you do have questions, please send them in, because we would love to answer them. Okay. So I want to play this video for you all so that you can get a better understanding of what I mean by neuroplasticity. It'll help you to get better understanding when I talk about effective ways of responding, so you know the reasons why we are doing that. So I hope this helps you.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. As neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. So we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
We will be sending you a link to that video, so that you can maybe have some better audio quality. We were trying to adjust the sound while we were playing that, so hopefully it won't blow your ears out. Sorry, but if you need that, we'll just make sure that you get that link. So now let's talk about the solutions, right? So this is the whole concept of neuroplasticity, okay? And that is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life, okay? So this is the answer to the question of, well, if what I'm doing is ineffective, what is it that I can do? Okay, what can I do? So the first thing is connecting our young people with a supportive adult. Those supportive adults should be a couple of things. These are the top three. They need to be a healthy connection. They need to be trained and receive the information like this, and they need to be committed. Committed to me is the top. Okay. Committed is not every 2 weeks. Okay. The supportive adult in their life needs to be committed to their life long term. When they leave out of foster care and DHR is gone, are they going to be there? And if they're not, they need to communicate that, and we need to find someone else. Okay. The restorative approach mentions that instead of an alternative to isolation, they talk about having thoughtful conversations with staff and the youth together, which to me is an ISP meeting, to teach feelings management, to help youth and staff feel sane and worthwhile. So taking care of both the supportive adult and that young person and making sure that they feel fulfilled, so that they can have a healthy relationship. They basically, what the book says is that offers the greatest possible power for healing. And those supportive adults can link them to resources as well, and take them car buying and all those types of things that are important to them. And that gives them something to look forward to, right? And also, when we talk about connections, we're also talking about helping them rebuild relationships. Okay. Addressing relationships are important because it helps them to know how to make amends. So it gives that biological parent the opportunity to do that. And if they don't, what they can do is they can learn how to navigate that. Most of our young people are going back and interacting with their biological family. Okay. So how powerful would it be if their brain system can shift by seeing their parent in a different light and learning how to navigate that? That's where neuroplasticity comes in, because then you're talking about neurotransmitters sending signals like, okay, my parent isn't a threat to me anymore because I have the power to be able to say, I can't do this right now with you because you're triggering my stress responses. And that is where treatment comes in, is helping them to navigate that. Okay. It also, like, if we can model that for them, it teaches them about healthy relationships. It individualizes things for them as well. That's important as far as rebuilding relationships. We can model, or a supportive adult can model. Also, the power of being able to say yes, because they hear no a lot. Hearing yes sends those happy chemicals. And if we can find creative ways to say yes, we may not be able to say yes to everything, but we need to be able to be saying yes to something, to give them that hope and empower them that things are not always bad, so we can counteract that threat response. Okay. And make sure to include them in their ISP meetings and really everything. They need to be included. Instead of us gaining control, why don't we try to control responses? Okay. So, for example, what are you doing is a concern to me. Would you rather? Would you rather text me when you make a move so I can discuss this with you on how that's affecting you, or how it might affect you? Or you can continue to make the poor choices, and we won't be able to continue to support you. Okay. Or we'll support you less because we're concerned about what it is that you're getting involved in. Okay. Also, interventions that help them explore their life and resolve emotional untruths. So therapy could be helpful, it could not. This is where you have to engage the young person and how they're feeling and really get their feedback on it. You may have to get creative. If the supportive adult can do the treatment stuff like the life book and things like that, maybe let them do it. And they are going to need treatment for the right thing. Okay. If they receive a psychological and the psychological says they need treatment for a certain thing, it's the indicator. It isn't the be all of all, but it's something to consider. If they have obsessive compulsive disorder and that is identified, what would be beneficial to us is to find out if there is certain because everything has a certain treatment outline. And if there are certain things in that that's going to help them to heal, then we could actually do that. Also, self-directed goal setting, aka ISPs, with their input is helpful. That's another good intervention and treatment for them. Exercise, introducing them to things that they have never considered before, because again, they weren't exposed to that. That's why for dream council meetings, we want to expose them to different types of exercise and cooking, healthy eating, different people in the community, because that opens up their brain to just what they know. Okay. Connect them to the community. That's basically the same thing. It's helping them to find solutions, helping them to find things that they enjoy. And really, we need to help them make that initial connection, because again, that threat response team is going to tell them, oh no, these people are going to reject you. They're not really going to help you. You're just going to fail. And we have to help them make that initial connection, because that's what their brain is signaling to them. And to us, it looks like that ignore, attention seeking, risk taking. That's what it looks like to us. But what's going on in their brain is signaling something completely different. Okay. Independence doesn't mean they have to do it by themselves. We have to help them find solutions. We have to rewire their brain by securing new and safe connections with people who understand the neuroscience of the teen brain. And it's our job to educate them. It's our job to help them gain that information of, I know this is what it looks like, but this might be what's happening. And we don't have all the answers. That may not be it. They just may not want to do it, and that's fine too. But we still have to consider that there are some other things that may be happening or occurring. They need someone who will check in with them regularly. That's why community connections are so important. It doesn't have to be face to face. I try my best with our ambassadors to text them at least once a month. If I don't hear from them, some text and call and FaceTime and have different varying degrees, but I at least force myself to at least text them and check on them at least once a month to make sure they're okay. And then most importantly is we need to help them build essential life skills. Things that are going to be helpful to them. I was asking one of our ambassadors the other day, like, when was the last time you actually tried to cook a meal? And then, I received the response of, well, I burnt a biscuit in the oven. And I'm like, okay, you need to cook something. Cook a meal or something, because you're going to be out on your own eventually. And if you're burning up biscuits, you ain't going to eat. You're just going to be eating McDonald's. So they need to learn these life skills. They need to buy a car. They need to ride the bus. They need to know how to get a job, interview skills, all of those things. And the question to ask is, who is going to teach them? If it can't be you, who is it going to be? Okay. So all of those things are going to be effective in helping our young people restructure their brain, their stress reactions, and their brain responses. Okay. So educate yourself. If you stay informed, you will be able to explore your own thoughts, your feelings, and your values in regards to the youth and young people you serve. You have to do that self-reflection. That's why I did the petty professional training when we did our regional consultations, because I really want all of us as workers in the world of child welfare to really consider how we are utilizing our own personal experiences of life in placing them on our kids. I didn't grow up like our kids did. I can't imagine some of the things that they have experienced. And so how I feel life trajectory should be is going to be different on what's best for them. So you have to evaluate your perspective. You have to evaluate if you are placing your own personal values. If my family believed that college was the most important thing in life, that is what I believe and my family believes, but that may not be the best thing for our young people. They may need to take up a trade or work for the time being until they can find themselves or get their brain. Maybe they need to do some type of structured work before they can do structured schoolwork. So we just need to consider those things and how that's going to affect them. To me, there's a difference between making excuses and creating solutions. Okay. We're not letting them get away with it. All right. What the restorative approach says is that doing these things increases the likelihood that staff, us, will consider what is behind the behavior that a kid is displaying before taking action to respond to the behavior. And so we have to believe in the capacity for the brain to change. That's what neuroplasticity is us saying we can do these things to help them. And it's a slow process, okay? They talk about the brain that it comes with slow repetition. It's basically the brain is creating a new map. Bruce Perry does brain mapping. I can't think of the name of his books right now, but he talks about brain mapping and basically restructuring. He actually has treatment based off of that. That they do a scan of a kid's brain, and based off of what they see on that brain, they structure their therapy based off of that, of what their needs are. And it's like a repeat thing. Okay, you just have to constantly do it. So some of the things that I have researched and gotten information from, trauma-informed care, of course, is good, but some of these other things are actually really helpful. Conscious discipline is good. It really considers where a child is coming from. It's mostly catered to a young person, but they do some adolescent things as well. They have a ton of free stuff right now in the midst of the pandemic, so check them out. The restorative approach is really good. It's a book. I'm not 100% sure if it's for sale. I actually got it while I was working residential, so I'm not really sure, and I'll have to look that up for y'all. But it's really good. Social emotional learning is more educational, but we're dealing with our kids in education too. So we need to know how, when we go to IEP meetings, how to help our education staff really get around our kids and help them be successful in their education. It's a hard, tough road for our kids in their education. And they rock it out, but I truthfully believe that we can help them a little bit better. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. I don't get to talk about this a whole lot in this, but it's totally tied to that. It's really more medically driven. The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke Harris is a really good introduction to that. She's out of California. She's their Surgeon General, but she wrote a book because she started a clinic out there, and she partnered with the founders of ACEs, and that's what the Paper Tigers and the Resilience documentaries talk about. They're really, really good. I think you have to purchase them though, but that is totally worth it because it really gives you a perspective. It covers education, medical, and social, and merges all of that together really well. Because you have to consider like those incidences we talk about and how it affects everything, including their medical, and physical selves. So all of that information to me is key for us to be able to provide our kids with what it is that they need. I'll make sure that you all get this so that you can get the that information. These are just some of the resources. What I'll do is I'll email out y'all the presentation, and I'll make sure to include everything that I talked about, because there are a couple of that I added and didn't know that I was going to add. So just some final notes. I just want you guys to ask yourself the question is, how do we help break the cycle? How do we break that cycle of trauma? What can we do? They're never going to just tell you exactly what is going on. That is the nature of teenagers. And that's okay. It's okay that they don't tell us everything. Sometimes it frustrates me too, but sometimes it's just, we can only do what we can. But if we do it in the right way, I think it's really effective for them. And we have to change first. Like, we have to change our mindset and the way that we are seeing them, and how we're pressing our values and our own thoughts and opinions on them. We just have to remember that sometimes it's going to take a couple of different tries, and we won't always get it right. Okay, that psychological could be wrong, and there may be something different, or they need to go to a different psychological, or they weren't feeling good that day. All of those things can affect it, and they could get it wrong. And so we could try something else. But I am a firm believer that you don't give up on kids, because that's just going to trigger that threat response for them. And I'm just not on board for being a part of continuing those negative brain reactions for them. I want to create positive, those happy transmitters. I want to be a part of having them to find those. And so we also just keep meeting their basic needs as best as we can, and help them rewire old and severed connections. And believe in the power of neuroplasticity and that can happen for them. So I hope that gave you a good idea of what um, a teen brain does, the power of neuroplasticity. I hope that gave you an understanding of the neuroscience of the teenage brain. Like I said, if you do have any questions and any needs as far as that is concerned, we have a couple of different ways that you can connect with us. So first, we have a website, and that's www.ilconnect.org. There's a lot of resources on there, a lot of information, both for our young people and for social workers. We have some specifically COVID-19 resources page there as well. The best way to get in contact with us and to stay connected with us is through our Facebook page, which is IL Connect. That is going to be the best way. We post all types of information and resources across Alabama and nationally. We also currently have Facebook groups. One is for social workers, so I hope that you will join that group because that will help us to really personalize the services we provide and we can stay connected with you because everybody's spread out in Alabama, and so we won't always get to see you. That Facebook group will allow us the opportunity to be able to really kind of give you that one-on-one. We also have a Facebook group for our IL youth as well. We really, really hope that you will encourage them to join that Facebook group. I know sometimes with Facebook for them, they want to remain anonymous. And so that what that group can do is help us to develop that peer-to-peer interaction. And they all already know each other. So, you know, that's fine. So they can interact there. And so we hope that you'll join us there. I hope that you'll continue to watch these webinars. We have one more after this catered to fostering hope, to their education, some good information for you. If you weren't able to catch these, please email us and let us know, and we can talk about what we can do to kind of help you with that. So I hope that you will connect with us. You can email us, call us. We have youth consultants available to consult with our young people across the state if you need us. Right now we have a central, Stephanie Cahey is our central youth consultant, and Evelyn Williams is our South Youth consultant, and then Bridget is covering for our North. And so if you have a young person who is in need of someone to help rewire some brain connections, give us a call, okay? So that is all I have for right now. I hope that you all enjoyed it, and I hope y'all have a great day. Thank you.